And let me enable transcripts. Okay, so transcripts are on. All right, welcome everyone to today's event entitled The What, Why, and How of Digital Transformation. I'm pleased to introduce our guest, Roy Atkinson, who probably doesn't need any introductions. Roy is a legend in our industry. He's an award-winning author and speaker. Usually find him as one of the keynotes at most ITSM conferences. In fact, we were talking about service management world, so if you're attending there, say hi to Roy, join his session. He serves as CEO and principal advisor for Clifton Butterfield, LLC, and is recognized as a thought leader in IT service management, employee experience, and customer experience. He is a fellow of the Institute of Digital Transformation, a member of the HDI Strategic Advisory Board. His expertise has been featured internationally in print, on podcasts, webinars, and conferences. CIO Insight calls him the model for future digital leader. Very nice. Roy is one of HDI's top 25 thought leaders for 2023. Probably a lot of you are members of HDI. If not, I encourage you to join. And is a top 10 thought leader in IT strategy according to Thinkers 360. I'll have to look that one up. He holds a master's certificate in certificate in advanced management strategies from Tulane University, Fremont School of Business. I'm extremely fortunate to bring him here today to talk to you. Quickly, the overview of today's presentation. It'll last anywhere between 40 and 45 minutes with time left over in the Q&A at the end for the Q&A. We will hold off till the end for the Q&A because we have a lot of material to cover. Everyone will be on mute. Feel free to use the Q&A window to ask your questions. Use the chat box or chat feature to talk with each other. We do encourage you to conversate with each other, but you definitely use the Q&A to ask your questions. But we are, so if you do want to talk, just use the raise your hand feature and I will take you off mute. When you're done asking the question, I'd ask you that you put yourself back on mute. Just so you're aware, we are recording this session and as usual, it will be available on the ITSM website within 5 business days. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Roy.
Well, howdy and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Mitch for inviting me to do this talk. And just a little bit of background. You can see that I'm basically a business-oriented guy. What am I doing with higher education? Just so you know, my biggest job in IT was with a large research institution, which was affiliated with Heidelberg University in Germany. University of Heidelberg, I should say, with the University of Maine and with UC Davis. We had several hundred PhDs running around a campus, so I have a little bit of background that might make me familiar with how things work in higher ed. We had a lot of postdoctoral students there. It was a very interesting and challenging environment. It was super, actually very highly scientific and a lot of high-tech stuff we had going on. And if you want to know more about that, I'd be happy to talk about it a little bit. But today we're going to talk about digital transformation. What the heck is it and why are people doing it? Which is a fair question, by the way. So I'm going to bring up my presentation. I'm going to try not to PowerPoint you to death. If I start doing that, then you can leave. No, don't leave.
I have a buzzer, Roy, so I'll hit the buzzer.
There you go. That's it. The death by PowerPoint buzzer. So it's just a little bit about me, as Mitch was kind to inform you. And the reason it's a very interesting thing. It's a certificate, master's certificate from Tulane, is because they did not offer an online MBA at the time. It's basically an EMBA. But at the time, they weren't issuing an MBA, so it's called a master's certificate. So here's just basic overview of what I think we're going to get out of today. And it's a working definition of digital transformation. And believe you me, people have trouble with that. When I first started at Clifton Butterfield, started becoming acquainted with organizations all over the world and got many definitions of digital transformation. One company told me that they could solve the digital transformation issues with a mobile app. Yeah, no. So How do you assess the readiness of an organization? I'm going to talk quite a bit about that. I'm going to get it. That'll be the most detail because as I was discussing with Mitch a little ahead of time, and we were talking about service management world, I mentioned that my presentation there is going to be, it's called Transformation Consternation. And it's basically centers around why organizations fail and how to prevent that from happening where you are. So talk quite a bit about readiness. Who needs to be involved? Where do you start? And quick examples of the technologies that can enable you and how to measure the progress. We'll talk a little bit about KPIs. We'll also talk about why it's difficult to measure. So speaking of measuring, this is a little research from EDUCAUSE's 2021 quick poll on digital transformation. If you're not familiar with this, there's lots of information that EDUCAUSE published online about digital transformation. Some of it's extremely useful. And you can see there the increase within a couple of years in digital transformation and how people are engaged in it. And I'm sure it's more than 44% now, because just about every organization that I talk to is in one way or another talking about digital transformation in their world. And that's a good thing. It shouldn't stop. And I'll go more into that as time goes on. But I think the first thing we need to do is define what we're talking about. It's always a good place to start, right? And this is a pretty useful definition, I think. I got a little bit of negative feedback ahead of time from the folks that Mitch talked to, but in higher education, organizational change realized by means of digital technologies and business models with the aim to improve institutions' operational performance. That comes from collegiate education. And the EDUCAUSE definition, basically intentional change in institutional value proposition. Talk about that a bit. Shifts in culture, workforce, and technology. So the first thing that I take out of that, and I think everybody should take away from that, is the fact that IT, by all means, should not be driving digital transformation. If in your organization, IT is driving digital transformation, you got a problem. And actually you have several. And I'll get more into detail about that. IT definitely needs to be highly involved. Why? Because there's a lot of technical stuff that needs to be dealt with. And technology is why it's called digital. The two operative words in digital transformation. Transformation, that's digital. And that's only one aspect of business transformation or institutional transformation. But certainly IT should be involved. So basically, this is what I think the definition boils down to. We're really talking about organizational transformation that's enabled by digital technologies. And I'm going to give you a quick example of how this happens, even at the grassroots level. From a business organization. It's actually a contact center. This could have been a contact center at a higher ed institution, but happened to be in a business. And what they made a business decision, which was to improve customer experience by enabling the agents in their contact center to talk directly to subject matter experts all over the institution. No delays, no going through hierarchies, no sending, email to somebody, connecting them directly to each other over a collaboration tool, like let's say Microsoft Teams or Slack or something similar, but also allowing them to see which subject matter experts were available so they could pick and choose somebody with the area of expertise they were looking at. So what they did was they made the business decision to improve customer experience. That was step one. Step two was, how are we going to improve customer experience? We're going to do it by empowering the agents in the contact center to talk directly to the SMEs with nobody in the middle and no hierarchies to worry about. And we're going to show them who's available to talk to them so that they get their answers quickly during the conversation with a customer. Hopefully do it in real time and enable that by providing the tools that they needed to see who was available and contact them. So that's how it works on a small scale. How do you do that across an entire institution? Well, there's the rub, right? That's really what we're going to talk about. So one of the phrases in the definitions was the aim to improve an institution's operational performance. That comes from the collegiate education definition. And so, that performance affects everybody, right? Students, faculty, and staff, your three primary constituency audiences there. That's one of the things that's different about a higher education institution, of course, is that you have those three different publics that you have to talk to, those three groups of stakeholders. And most businesses have at the most two, like a board of directors and their customers, or their shareholders and their customers, however you want to divide it. So things are a little bit tricky. And all three, as you know, those three groups have different approaches, different needs, and different wants. So good luck to you. It's a tough world that you live in. So what are the barriers to digital transformation? And I said that I was going to talk a little bit about failure. By estimates from the big guys, the McKinseys, the Deloittes, about somewhere between 70% and 84%, depending on whose numbers you look at, of digital transformations, they say fail. Hard to say fail about something that's not a project. But anyway, the digital transformations do not produce the desired results. Let's put it that way. EDUCAUSE says that some of the barriers are antiquated, siloed technology, lack of technology governance, lack of necessary skills, and change management difficulties. That all makes sense to me. At the Institute for Digital Transformation, we have a little bit more of a detailed list, but there's a lot of commonality. So what I've done here is I've done color coding so that you can see where things fit across the division there. Antiquated silo technology. Okay, you can look at it that way. You can look at technical debt. I'll wait till the end of this slide and then I'll talk about that a little bit more. Lack of talent for digital is what the Institute calls it. Lack of necessary skills is what EDUCAUSE calls it. But basically what we're talking about is people who don't have the required skills to deal with what they need to deal with. When the tools change, when the emphasis changes from one thing to another, you don't have the skills to get with the new tools rapidly, and speed is of the essence here in a lot of digital transformation stuff. So it's important that people are properly skilled. And I'm going to mention a skills framework called Sophia. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Change management difficulties. Oh boy. So the Institute says cultural and behavioral change is always a joy, right? If you've been involved in a project of any size, if you've been a project manager at any time, you know that getting people to change their behavior is huge. The organizational structure not aligned properly, that's going to cause change management difficulties, lack of internal alignment, and lack of senior support. I like to say that buy-in is not enough. For any major organizational initiative like this, buy-in is not enough. Buy-in says, okay, you can go ahead and do that. That's not going to get it done. You have to have commitment. This has to be senior driven. And that's why I said IT really should not be driving this. The heads of the organization, whether that's your chancellor, your board of trustees, wherever that's coming from at the top, your president, however it is in your institution, whatever your structure is, it's got to come from the top, and it has to be commitment to do this, to say, we're going to modernize this institution, we're going to have digital transformation, and here's the outcomes that we seek. How are we going to improve the processes? How are we going to improve the value proposition of the institution, as it said in the definition? So one of the other things I really like to point to, being somewhat of a data weenie, I talk about siloed data. It is the worst. And as time has gone on, especially in institutions like the ones that you work for and live with, you've got silos of data all over the place. Every application that we use spits out a stream of data. Every department has its own preferences as far as the tools it's using. So what we wind up with, instead of a data lake or a data warehouse, we wind up with little data shacks or data puddles all over the institution. It makes life crazy. Now, luckily, as time has gone on, the tools that are being introduced that are supposed to help with digital transformation are becoming very capable of absorbing data. There's lots of APIs. There's lots of ways to get at that data. It's become a lot more flexible, but for years, these puddles of data have been occurring. And a lot of times it's very hard to wrap around data structures, the differences in the way things are done, the different workflows that happen that produce the data, all of that good stuff. And that is really a danger to digital transformation, because what happens is that if the data can't be properly shared and absorbed across the entire organization, then the organizational structure can't move forward. So that's another way the organizational structure is not aligned. If you look up about 5 from the bottom there, and I mentioned that before, and it has little to do with IT infrastructure. It has some to do because of all the applications that are running. But more often than not, it's the fact that HR has a tool and finance has a tool and IT has tools that produce data. Everybody's got tools that are spitting data out, and they're not really compatible with each other. But as I said, there's a lot of progress being made now with the ability to absorb data. And here's one of the places where I think AI is really going to help. Being able to plow through mountains of data that nobody has ever looked at. Dark data makes up between 50 and 80% of most organizations' data. Dark data being that which is never examined or used or analyzed. It's just there sitting. It's like the recorded calls from a contact center. Nobody ever listens to them except in tiny, tiny pieces. What about all the student records that are produced over a period of time that there could be tremendous analysis on, but nobody has the time to do it? Well, now with AI, we're getting more of an opportunity to go in and analyze that data and have it spit things out in a manner that can be consumed, because it's starting to be able to talk to us in plain language. So basically, if you're thinking about digital transformation in terms of technology, stop doing that, because what you really need to do is think about it more in terms of organizational change. And I see a comment here that says, to me, these lists are what the tail on the dog would cite as the reasons why the dog is headed in the wrong direction. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what that means. But yes, the tail wags the dog a lot in digital transformation initiatives. Big organizational initiatives are very tough. And the tail wagging the dog is one of the reasons that transformation falls short. because the tail very often is what we see when we look at the dog. What do we see? We see the tail going back and forth. It attracts our attention. And that is true of the shiny technical objects, the shiny new bits of software that people want to buy, the new latest ITSM tool or the new latest whatever. Collaboration doesn't happen because of a tool. Collaboration happens because people need to talk to each other in a cooperative way to accomplish something. So the first thing you have to do is make sure that they understand it's worth their while to collaborate to accomplish something. Then you can talk about how they're going to do that. And so the tail wagging the dog is the technology dictating the direction of the transformation. So yes, that is absolutely not the right way to go. So it's good to remember that the whole idea of digital transformation really should be driven by stakeholder experience. How are you going to make things better? How do you improve that value proposition? How do you make life better for all the stakeholders? And as I mentioned, that's your faculty, staff, and students, all three of those constituencies. And how can digital tools help? And that's where your digital expertise comes in, right? You need people who are familiar enough with the trends and directions in the digital tools and familiar enough with how to use those tools to make the enablement of the improvements happen. Okay. So this is the basic, the non-pie chart pie chart from EDUCAUSE. Learn, plan, and do. Okay, that's great. And I'll actually come back to that triumvirate of ideas. Phase 1, learn. Phase 2, plan. And phase 3 is do. So, yeah. But the key is when you do go through that, learn, plan, do, now what happens? Are you done? And the answer is no. And EDUCAUSE actually has some information about that as well. It's a journey, not a destination. This also brings difficulty into the equation because people like to see things finished. They like to see things done, and they like to be able to measure being done. That's why there's so many shiny objects that come to the fore, because they want to see that we've installed this tool, we have this many users, we've done it in this amount of time, it costs this amount of money. Guess what? Digital transformation doesn't work that way. Yes, you have measurements, and I'm going to get to some of those, actually quite a batch of them. But it is not a software upgrade project. Head is nodding so much yes to these. Thank you. Potential students, donors, invited speakers, it's everyone who interacts with the institution. Absolutely. Very good point. When we talk about stakeholder experience, we have to look at the big picture. And just as with customer experience, which is one of the areas that we deal with here at Clifton Butterfield, you have to think about the people who have just become aware of your organization and its products and services. You have to think about the people who are beginning the customer journey. You have to think about all the touch points that they're going to touch it. And you have to figure out what happens at the end of that journey if they leave, or what the next phase is. And that's absolutely true. You've got to pay attention to everyone. UX research and design thinking are powerful tools. Yes, and beyond UX design is really important. I distinguish between UX and EX, or however we want to say. UX, I think you're using it in the broad term to cover all those constituencies. And that's a good way to look at it. Everyone starts at a different point. Absolutely. So you have a bunch of simultaneous journeys going on. This is not easy stuff. And that's another thing that people have to understand, that this is very difficult to do. And again, it is even more difficult because it's aimed at changing an organization in some fundamental ways. Uh, we've seen it over the past few years where institutions have gotten more focused on online learning. As I mentioned, and it's not that long ago, it's not ancient history. When I did my business school at Tulane, they were really just getting into online education, and they didn't offer degrees through it yet. They only offered certificates. It took me 2 years to get through it, just like if I was doing a master's degree, and I had to do all the same stuff, business law and international business and financial, stuff, accounting and all that jazz. But they didn't offer a certificate. Why? Because the impetus wasn't there yet. There were very few institutions that were really doing online learning. Now it's become a must, and especially because it got a huge kick in the pants from the pandemic. The pandemic changed a lot of behavior. And so it's absolutely true that people are coming at this in different directions, in different ways, different speeds. And there again, as I mentioned, this is a cycle. It is not a project. There are multiple projects involved in digital transformation. For example, the installation of a new tool, the change of one system to another. How are we going to get this online? We're going to be using different grading programs, or however it works at your institution. It is not a project. But the other reason I put this in is because every presentation must have a cycle diagram, especially IT. If it's IT related in any way, shape, or form, got to have a cycle diagram in there. Otherwise, Mitch doesn't get to take a drink out of his shot glass. So
we need a Venn, and we need a matrix, and then we'll have the triumphant.
There you go. I like Venn diagrams. One of my favorite things, especially if there's no overlap. Those are the good ones. So let's talk about how we can think about readiness in terms of digital transformation. And remember that because this is not a project that doesn't have an end date, you can talk about readiness at any point along the line. And I think that's an important concept to understand. It's not just at the beginning before you start. And most institutions are already heavily engaged in digital transformation. And so you really need to understand that readiness occurs everywhere along the lines. So these are the big areas of readiness that the Institute calls readiness dimensions. Operational sustainability, and basically that means that you can keep going while you're making changes underneath. Organizational agility, the ability to, what's the business buzzword? Pivot, your ability to, oh, look at that, we've got balloons. Strategic agility, to capture opportunities where they occur. And probably most of all, disruptive culture. When the word disruptive first started being used in context of business change a few years ago, I was kind of resistant to it. I did way too much English education, and disruption was a very negative thing as far as I was concerned. And it certainly can be. But the point of being a disruptive culture is that you have to be willing to get blindsided. You have to be ready for that. You also have to be willing to let people change your thinking. There's the old story about cutting the end off the roast for Thanksgiving or whatever holiday. Someone always cuts the end off the roast, and one of the kids says to mom, "Why are you cutting the end off the roast?" I don't know. We always cut the end off the roast. We've always done it this way. And it turns out that 2 generations back, great grandma had to cut the end off the roast because the roasting pan wasn't big enough. And since then, everybody cuts the end off the roast to make it fit, even though it's not applicable anymore. So getting disruptive and saying we don't have to cut the end off the roast, that can upset the apple cart a lot of times. And as I said, and I will continue to say, organizational change is not easy at any level. And especially when you're talking about fundamental changes. So let's drill down into this readiness assessment here a little bit. And I'm going to give you a little link. I won't actually give you a physical link. You can go find it. But I'll give you a hint of where you might be able to get some help if your organization is ready to do it, if they want to invest in it. So there's the 4 areas: operational sustainability, organizational agility, strategic agility, and disruptive culture. And these are some of the elements that are involved in each one. And strategic clarity, what a concept. The organization actually has a clue where it's going. There's a clear vision to where things are going. There's interfunctional integration. That goes back to what I was saying before about silos. It's not only the data, but it's also the ability to work across the organization and get rid of those organizational silos that make life really difficult. Being able to work together, having those contact center agents and able to reach across and talk to the SMEs at whatever level they're at. It didn't matter. Their expertise was what matters. I mean, there's really 2 kinds of silos. One is the silo of expertise. In other words, this team knows all about how to do this. And the other is the silo of power, and that's the dangerous one. You know this. You've run into it enough times. I don't have to tell you. You run into those fiefdoms, the silos of power across the organization, people being unwilling to give up the goods, not share the knowledge, not share the data, not change the applications, all of that. That's where the fun of organizational change happens. So organizational governance, and governance has taken on somewhat of a negative connotation. Governance simply means that you have a clue what you're doing. There's some oversight, there's some planning that goes around things, and it makes sure that you're headed in a compatible direction. It doesn't have to be the same direction. It has to be a compatible direction. Metrics-driven management. Boy, how many times do you see data-driven on any given day? You see it again and again and again. And how few times do you actually see people being data-driven? Being driven by data is one of the things that causes disruptive, or is an element of disruptive culture. As you can see below there, evidence-based decision-making. Okay, that's metrics-driven decision-making, metrics-driven management, based on the evidence that you have, not the highest paid person's opinion, which is usually abbreviated HIPPO. Team dynamics, that's not the software application, it's just the dynamics of a team. Organizational agility, the ability to change the way that your organization works together. I remember having a conversation with an organizational expert named Marcus Buckingham, if you've ever read any of his books or anything like that. And he told me a story about some work that he was doing with a major consulting organization that I won't name, but it starts with D. And he was talking to them about their teams and how they were managing their teams and how their teams were working and how their teams were fluid, constantly changing, because their teams would be focused on one thing and then they'd, dissolve and move into other teams, and people were constantly changing back and forth. And he said, how many teams do you have here at wherever it was? And they said, we don't know. Okay, well, maybe you need to think about that and how you manage them. Teamwork mindset. I could go on for a long time on that, but I'm not going to, because you've probably seen a lot about teamwork. And if you want to know more about some excellent sources for information on teamwork, let me know. And I will fill you in. And I see a couple of questions here. I'm just going to look at the questions. Seems like an added barrier could be lack of executive understanding and education of what practices are available for transformation. Yes, absolutely. Most higher ed presidents have PhDs in their fields way outside of being associated with digital transformation. This is a part of educating up. And this is why that the first thing there under operational sustainability, strategic and functional clarity, if they don't understand it at the top, they're not going to be clear about the strategy, are they? If they can't understand the concepts, then we got a problem. But too often it happens that we've tried to convince, and when I say we, I'm talking about IT organizations in general and IT service management organizations in general, have tried to convince those top executives in terms that make sense to us, but they have not got a clue about. And so, yes, ITIL, lean, agile, all of that stuff has to do with the way we do business, but they don't know about it. And frankly, they don't care very much until you show the value of them. That's something that I'm pretty heavily involved in. This. A lot of the work I do is to try to help IT and IT service management organizations show the value that they're providing for the organization. Do I differentiate between data-driven and data-informed? Yes, absolutely. People can make terrible decisions that are not based on the data that they've been informed about. You can be informed about data, and sometimes that will produce a negative reaction. For example, I have a very specific example in this case. Sitting in a meeting, organizers talking about the results of an employee experience survey. And about 15 minutes into the meeting, upper executive swoops in, says, I'm not sure I trust any of this data, totally undermining the entire purpose of the meeting, where we were discussing improvements we could make based on the data that we had. So now the data has been undermined by an upper executive who was informed of the data and decided they didn't like it, and therefore they weren't going to buy it. Done. I mean, it was over at that point. The meeting might as well have stopped. So yes, data informed, not the same as being data driven. Data driven means, oh my, we had 25% of people who didn't like the fact that upper management made this decision, whatever happens to be. We've got a certain segment of students who are acting in this way when this happens. You have to pay attention to that stuff. Look at the evidence and follow where it leads. And there's lots of different directions you can go with that, but that's the key, is acting on what you actually know. So don't make the actions too big, make them fit the data, but believe the data if it's a trustworthy source, and it should be coming from some of the tools that you have, within a certain margin of error. You have to put confidence in the tools. So let's look at some more of these over here. Strategic agility, which means the ability of those upper level people to change their minds. Ultimately, it's the ability to react to the data, react to the evidence that they have, react to the market conditions, react to the demands of the higher education community in general, and say, wow, we need to swivel around this way, and let's think about that. Strategic sensitivity. We understand what's going on in the world, and we're being sensitive to it, and that can go down a bunch of different ways. Resource fluidity, being able to move things around and have the resources applied in different ways around the organization. Taking action, what a concept. And knowledge of competitors. And I will tell you, there's a specific example I know here of in this regard as well. Is the CEO of a software company was talking about some of the applications of AI. And I mentioned those contact center recordings. They record every call. Don't believe that stuff. Your call may be recorded. Your call's being recorded. And again, hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of calls nobody ever pays attention to. And that CEO said, well, what if our artificial intelligence tool could be applied to review all of those recordings and discover how many times customers mentioned our competition and whether it was positive or negative? Would that be useful to us? Wow, you bet it would be, right? So that's an application of tools to accomplish a specific organizational goal. Again, there's the digital transformation enabled by the artificial intelligence to make discoveries about customer experience and customer feedback. Okay. Again, business decision, technology follows. That's the key. Let's just look at some of the elements of disruptive culture here for a second, too. There's one thing I wanted to point out that may not make sense, but I'm going to, I'm looking at some notes here that I have about collaborative digital storytelling. It's an interesting term, isn't it? How does that work? Holy cats. So think about the ability to build a story, and this is how you get your upper level buy-ins. The ability to build a story around the data that you have. I did a session some years ago, a breakout session at a conference that was all about stories that your metrics can tell you. Data tells stories. This happened, and look what happened as a result. We put this tool in place, people stopped using things. We put this tool in place, people adopted it. We did enterprise service management. We spread the service management principles and practices, and we put a tool in place that was common across the entire organization, and productivity went up in 2/3 of organizations. That's an actual number from some research that was done at HCI. So tell the stories of how that works, and being able to do that in a way that makes sense for the future. Think about how you would narrate the story of making the changes that you need to accomplish to get to some of your digital transformation goals. You have goals? Oh my, I thought it wasn't a project. Well, of course you've got goals. You have the big, hairy, audacious goal, this is called the BHAG, which is to improve the organization's responsiveness, to change its direction, to make significant inroads in the world of higher education, whatever your board decides on what that language is going to look like. So let's look at some more of the cultural stuff here too. Critical thinking and analysis. Wow. Yeah, I think so. I think you need to be able to think critically and do some serious analysis as you go. So this is all people-based stuff, right? Let's look some more of the. Oh, Mitch, thanks for posting the links there.
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you.
And you'll get other links in this deck when we send it out after the recording. Yeah,
I've included links to a lot of the resources here. So great example of how to use AI in a good way. I thought that particular articulation of how AI could be applied to make a difference was extremely good. Rowan Trollope was the CEO's name, by the way. He was a brilliant guy. Don't forget to add your questions in the Q&A. Please do. Yes. And it's not all just it's just Gen AI. That is correct. There are so many different types of AI. I work closely with a company that's really AI based, and they have their own internal AI tools, as well as pulling in some generative AI from the outside into their own environment. While we're talking about AI, this is a little bit off topic, but I want to go there because there's just so much talk about Gen AI now. one of the big concerns that organizations have, and rightfully so, is that they don't want people spilling the beans into Gen AI. Confidential information, organizational language, copyright, patent, all of that good stuff, intellectual property of a bazillion kinds getting spilled into the training data for generative AI. It's happening all over the place. The most recent number I saw was that 70% of organizations have had at least one case of somebody on the inside doing a prompt that contained confidential information, confidential organizational information into ChatGPT, which therefore gets to use it wherever it feels like. And that is not a good thing. So artificial intelligence organizations have figured out a way, and it's really pretty simple in concept. In addition to their internal AI tools, they're pulling in the power of ChatGPT. Specifically, they use OpenAI, ChatGPT, which is running in Microsoft Azure in the cloud, and it is restricted to their instance of Azure. Therefore, all the security that's around their data to begin with is applied to ChatGPT. So nothing goes out. The tool is in there, but it's contained within that cloud tenancy, that environment, so that the data is not going out, and they can safely and securely use customer data and internal data without leaching it out into the world. So you'll get this, as Mitch mentioned, you'll get a copy of this, and this information and the breakdowns of each of these dimensions comes directly from the Institute for Digital Transformation. So now we need to talk about who needs to be involved, and this is for the IT lens. You were focused on IT and IT service management. That's great, and as I said, the IT underpins a lot of this because a lot of it revolves around the fact that we're using digital tools. It's organizational transformation, but enabled by digital technologies. So Gartner has a very good little chart about who needs to be involved, and I'm totally on board with this one. The CIO across the board, if they're not on board, you're dead in the water anyway. Applications people, data and analytics people, enterprise architecture people, infrastructure and operations, or I&O, procurement and vendor management. Why? Because there's so much third-party stuff going on, and that includes your cloud environments and a whole bunch of other stuff. And technical professionals, that's the people with the savvy to say that, oh, I know of a tool that does this, and I know where we can get it, right? Remember that digital skills that we talked about earlier on. Technical professional simply means somebody with an overview of the technical side of things so they can help out with that. So this is pretty good, I think, generally speaking. And we've got another question. What do you see happening in the
Roy, this
DX
one
world?
might be good at the end, because I think you're going to wrap up like where are we now and where are we going in the future. So we do want to try to jump in the Q&A in a little bit. So we'll give you the time to finish up your slides.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And let's look at the chat just quickly. Okay, cool. Got it. Thank you very much. So let's move on a little bit here. So organizational change, identify opportunity to change ways of working and doing. And then your digital technologies, identify ways to enable those ways of working and doing. Like the illustration I gave before, give the agents a chance to reach across the organization. That's a small thing, but think about things like that in your world that you can see better ways to do it and try to get that rolled into your digital transformation plans. As I said, probably shouldn't be driving it, but there's still changes that you can make and suggest to be part of the plan so that as you move forward, you are improving and increasing the opportunities to get better using the technologies. So let's talk about measurements here. Establish KPIs and define how success will be measured. Okay. So, and clearly identify your talent. I mentioned talent a couple of times. I don't know if you're familiar with SFIA, SFIA, that's Skills Framework for the Information Age. There's a link to it in the resources. It's run by a nonprofit organization. It's free / inexpensive, and it is comprehensive and used all over the world. It's a skills framework, and it's awesome. So digital technologies, we know that are part of it that comes kind of later. Collaboration, automation, and AI. We've talked about AI a little bit. Those are three big areas of digital technologies that are certainly out there right now and being talked about a lot. How do you collaborate better? How do you automate better? And how do you use AI better? Those tools are there to help you make the transformations that you need to make. So KPIs, new tools, that's probably the last one I would measure, because when what you measure tends to happen. So people are going to be buying new tools. No, you don't want that. You want tools that are going to be useful for you. Reduce costs, good. Improved capabilities is the big one. That's why I made it the different color. Employee and student satisfaction, savings in time, people, and money. Return on marketing. That's interesting. But digital marketing is huge and also would be an indication that your institution is being perceived in a positive light. New products and services, access to new markets, all of these things are very good indicators that you're being successful. Information provided once, not often. In other words, a student comes in, they give you all the information that you need, their background, their high school grades, their home address, all that stuff. You've got it. Done. Don't ask them for it over and over and over again. It works for companies. It works for institutions. Provide the information once. Improves online availability of administrative services. Better online availability of academic and digital education services. Better utilization of data analytics and decision-making. Again, data-driven. Again, using the tools for the right things. Staff transactions, shifting from traditional channels to digital services. Get the stuff online, make it available, give it a common interface so people know that they're connected with the right organization, etc. Increased utilization of machine learning and AI. And that all comes from Dr. Joe Haig, or some of it comes from Dr. Joe Haig. I've changed some of the wording of it, who writes a lot about higher education. So those are some of the ways that you can see if you're making progress. And we'll get to the question. And right after this, I just want to let you know that this is how you can reach me. Again, you're going to get a copy of this deck. So you'll be able to look at that. And also this whole list of links that you can get to. So don't be afraid to jump in and use those. And now I'll talk about that question, which is, what do you see happening in the digital transformation world in 2024? Well, it's going to continue. I think that's the first thing. Because as we said, it doesn't have an end date. Organizations are going to continue to talk about it. They're going to continue to think about it. I think there'll be a huge amount of adoption of AI. Some of it will be frivolous, but some of it will be really productive because people will begin to figure out good ways to use AI to enable internal processes and external relations. So I think that that's one of the big directions that 2024 is going to happen.
All right. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, so I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much. This concludes the presentation. I want to thank Roy for sharing his time today and insight with us. His contact can be found on the slide deck, as well as all the other resources we mentioned. If you didn't get a chance to copy all the links that I've been adding in chat, they will be available in the PDF that I'll send out as part of the recording. At the end, you'll receive a link to take a survey about the event. Please provide your honest feedback. It helps the ITSM Community Group Steering Committee plan more events like this and give you what you're looking for. So that feedback is very important. Also a reminder that the chat transcripts, recording, and other materials will be provided within 5 business days. You'll find it on the ITSM CG website, and I will provide a link to the website in the email that's going to come out. Again, we're always looking for fresh ideas. If you've got something that you want to, a story you want to share, or a topic that you're interested in sharing with the community group, I'm here. I will help you manage that for you. I say if you've got a voice, I've got a stage. So seek me out. You probably have my email and my email address on all the many emails I've sent out. So again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you again, Roy. It was a pleasure having you here. And everyone have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.